Wildfire is ravaging eastern Washington. This morning, the Northwest Coordination Center announced the cause of the fires are man-made. Big surprise. More than 600 structures damaged or destroyed, thousands of homes evacuated, entire neighborhoods running for their lives. Hundreds of thousands of acres burned across Washington. And right on schedule, politicians are declaring emergencies, activating the National Guard, holding press conferences, and congratulating themselves for responding to a disaster that government policy helped make far more destructive. Because the question is not merely how these fires started. The real question is this: why did they have so much fuel waiting for them? Why have we spent decades worrying about bugs, birds, fish, smoke permits, environmental lawsuits, and bureaucratic paperwork while our forests and wildlands accumulated enough dead material to burn like a loaded furnace? Washington is burning, and this did not happen overnight.
From Seattle to Los Angeles, this is Left Coast News. No apologies, just the truth.
What is happening across Washington right now is catastrophic. Governor Bob Ferguson has declared a statewide wildfire emergency and imposed a statewide ban on most outdoor and agricultural burning through September 30th. Approximately 4,000 firefighters have been battling more than a dozen major fires. The Washington National Guard has been activated outside, resources are arriving, and hundreds of thousands of acres have already burned this season. The most immediate devastation is unfolding around Spokane. The Old Trails, Fairview, and Autumn Lane fires exploded through the Spokane area under extreme heat, low humidity, drought conditions, and winds reportedly reaching 40 to 45 miles per hour. The combined fires have burned thousands of acres and damaged or destroyed more than 600 homes, businesses, outbuildings, and other structures. Thousands of homes were ordered evacuated. Patients were moved from the grand-staffed VA Medical Center. Utility facilities were threatened. Power was deliberately shut off in some areas to reduce the danger of additional ignitions. The Spokane Convention Center became an emergency shelter for people who had just watched entire neighborhoods disappear behind walls of flames. And before we go any further, let me say this clearly. The firefighters, law enforcement officers, dispatchers, utility crews, emergency managers, National Guard personnel, volunteers, and ordinary citizens working through this disaster deserve our complete support. They didn't create this situation. They're the ones being sent into the middle of it. But once the immediate danger passes, Washington's political leadership needs to answer some very uncomfortable questions. Because we cannot continue treating every catastrophic wildfire as some unforeseeable act of nature. The spark is not the whole story. Officials are still investigating the causes of several fires in the Spokane outbreak. Some of Washington's larger fires were started by lightning. Other fires may involve human activity, equipment, vehicles, or some other ignition source. But arguing only about what produced the first spark misses the larger point. A spark does not become a regional catastrophe unless the conditions allow it. The Spokane fires reportedly started in open grass and brush, not in the middle of a dense national forest. That distinction matters, and I'm not going to blame every burned Spokane home directly on federal logging restrictions or forest thinning policies when the facts don't establish that. But the speed and violence of these fires still reveal the underlying problem. Across Washington, we have built landscapes containing enormous amounts of continuous fuel. Dry grass, brush, overgrown understory, dead trees, downed limbs, dense young trees, and what wildland firefighters call ladder fuels, material that carries fire from the ground into shrubs, smaller trees, and eventually the forest canopy. Then we add drought, triple-digit temperatures, single-digit humidity, and 40-mile-per-hour winds. At that point, the ignition source almost becomes secondary. Lightning, a dragging trailer chain, a hot exhaust system, a piece of equipment, or one careless human being can provide the spark. Government policy determines whether that spark encounters a defensible landscape or a powder keg. A century of bad policy. For much of the last century, American land management policy was built around suppressing nearly every wildfire. Put it out. Stop it immediately. Don't allow the fire to move naturally through the ecosystem. That policy sounded reasonable. Nobody wants communities, timber, or public land destroyed. But many eastern Washington forests evolved with frequent, relatively low-intensity fire. Those fires consumed grass, needles, small trees, dead limbs, and surface vegetation. They reduced competition between trees and helped prevent massive fuel accumulation. We removed those natural fires from the landscape, but we failed to replace them with enough thinning, grazing, mechanical treatment, timber harvest, or prescribed burning. The result was a growing fuel debt. Year after year, the forest became denser. More small trees filled the understory. Dead material accumulated. Insects and disease weakened additional trees. Then environmental policy increasingly shifted toward a preservation model that often treated human intervention as inherently suspicious. Do not cut it. Do not remove it. Do not disturb the habitat. Do not affect the owl. Do not disturb the beetle. Do not inconvenience the fish. Do not create temporary smoke. So the material stayed on the ground. And in the dry forests of eastern Washington, dead wood does not always rapidly decompose into harmless soil. It can sit there for years, drying, curing, and waiting. Eventually, nature removes it anyway. Nature just removes it at 1,500 degrees. The state already admits the problem. This is not some theory invented by people who dislike environmental regulations. Washington's own Department of Natural Resources admits the scale of the problem. The state's 20-year forest health strategic plan identified approximately 2.7 million acres of eastern Washington forest land needing treatment to become more resilient against wildfire, disease, and insect damage. Think about that. 2.7 million acres. According to the DNR, the agency and its partners had accounted for roughly 589,000 treatment footprint acres by October 2025. That is real work, and the crews doing it deserve credit. But even those numbers demonstrate the size of the gap. The state itself acknowledges millions of acres need treatment, yet the work proceeds at a pace that can be overwhelmed by new growth, additional mortality, changing conditions, and fire moving through untreated neighboring land. DNR's public records also show just how modest many individual prescribed burns have been. Some projects treated dozens of acres, others treated a few hundred. One 2026 project treated 871 acres, another treated 490, another 208 acres northwest of Spokane. Those are useful treatments, but Washington has millions of acres requiring attention. We are attempting to drain a flooded basement with a coffee cup and then issuing a glossy progress report about how many cups were removed. The controlled burn contradiction. Here is where the policy becomes completely absurd. Prescribed fire is one of the most effective tools available for reducing surface fuels and restoring fire-adapted landscapes. Washington DNR says so. The Department of Ecology says so. Federal land managers say so. Fire scientists say so. Yet, conducting a prescribed burn requires suitable weather, available personnel, planning, permits, liability protection, coordination between agencies, and compliance with smoke management requirements. Some of those safeguards are reasonable. Nobody is arguing that agencies should randomly set the woods on fire during a windstorm. But the practical burn window can become extremely narrow. It cannot be too dry. It can't be too wet. It can't be too windy. Smoke can't move toward the wrong population center. Crews must be available. Permits must be approved. Nearby jurisdictions must cooperate. Litigation risks must be considered. Lawyers. Then, just when the conditions finally line up, another administrative restriction or staffing problem can delay the project. And when the window closes, the fuels remain. Politicians are terrified of being criticized because a prescribed burn creates smoke for a day or two. So instead, we get uncontrolled wildfires producing enormous smoke plumes for weeks, destroying homes, damaging watersheds, killing wildlife, scorching soil, and forcing vulnerable people to breathe hazardous air across several states. Apparently, a little planned smoke is unacceptable. A continent-sized smoke plume created by an uncontrolled inferno is simply an unfortunate consequence of climate conditions. That is not environmental protection. That is bureaucratic cowardice. Environmentalism that destroys the environment. There is an important distinction between conservation and environmental extremism. Conservation means managing natural resources responsibly so forests, wildlife, communities, and future generations can survive together. Environmental extremism treats virtually every human action as contamination. Under that worldview, cutting a tree is destruction. Removing deadfall is interference. Building a firebreak is habitat fragmentation. Grazing is harmful. Road access is harmful. Salvage logging is harmful. Prescribed burning creates smoke. Mechanical thinning disturbs the soil. Meanwhile, a catastrophic crown fire burns everything. The mature trees, the young trees, the nesting areas, the insects, the mammals, the streams, the spawning habitat, the soil organisms, and the homes, the electrical infrastructure, the public water systems, the entire landscape. You get it? Then heavy rain arrives, washes ash and unstable soil into the rivers, damages fish habitat, and produces erosion and debris flows. Somehow that outcome is treated as more natural and morally acceptable than sending crews into the forest beforehand with chainsaws, masticators, logging equipment, grazing animals, and prescribed fire. That is the central contradiction. Policies supposedly written to protect the environment can produce landscapes vulnerable to environmental annihilation. And the people writing those policies rarely live in the communities placed at risk. They work in offices. They attend stakeholder meetings. They write environmental impact statements. They file lawsuits. They issue mission statements about resilience. Then rural residents and firefighters are left standing in front of a wall of flame trying to save what the planners left behind. The human cost. Behind every statistic is a human being. More than 600 structures damaged or destroyed does not mean 600 buildings on a spreadsheet. It means family photographs, wedding albums, children's bedrooms, medication, tools, vehicles, livestock, pets, businesses, retirement savings, generations of work reduced to ash. It means elderly residents trying to evacuate through smoke, parents loading children into vehicles while embers fall around them, dispatchers answering call after call from people who can see flames moving toward their homes, firefighters trying to decide which structures can be defended and which must be abandoned because conditions have become too dangerous. I spent 17 years in the fire service, including time working wildland incidents. I know what heavy fuel does. I know what happens when a surface fire reaches brush and ladder fuels. I know what it feels like when weather, terrain, and fuel alignment take control away from people on the ground. There comes a point when firefighters are no longer extinguishing the fire. They are moving people out of its path and trying not to get killed. Politicians love talking about supporting first responders. Real support would mean giving firefighters landscapes they have a realistic chance of defending. What must change? Washington needs a fundamental shift from symbolic environmental policy to active land stewardship. First, forest health work must occur at landscape scale. Not a few isolated demonstration projects surrounded by miles of untreated fuel. Treatment needs to connect across watersheds, transportation corridors, utility routes, communities, state land, federal land, tribal land, and participating private property. Second, mechanical thinning and responsible timber harvest must return as major management tools. That includes removing small diameter trees, diseased trees, dangerous concentrations of dead material, and ladder fuels. Commercial timber can help offset treatment costs, but government must also fund removal of the non-commercial material nobody can profitably haul away. Third, Washington needs dramatically more prescribed burning during safe weather windows. That means reforming permits, staffing burn teams, improving liability protections, coordinating smoke management, and recognizing that temporary prescribed fire smoke can prevent vastly greater wildfire smoke later. Fourth, environmental reviews and lawsuits cannot be allowed to delay urgent fuel reduction projects indefinitely. The public deserves environmental safeguards. It also deserves deadlines, common sense, and recognition that doing nothing creates environmental consequences of its own. Fifth, communities in the wildland-urban interface need defensible space, hardened structures, evacuation routes, reliable alert systems, and backup power and communication. Forest management cannot guarantee that homes will survive every wind-driven fire. Home hardening alone cannot stop every regional firestorm. We need both. And finally, government must begin measuring success by outcomes rather than plans. Not how many meetings were held, not how many reports were published, not how many committees were formed. The state loves its committees. And how many dangerous acres were actually treated. How many fuel breaks were completed? How many communities became more defensible? How many prescribed burns occurred? How much time did environmental review add? How much money reached work crews rather than consultants and administrators? Those are the numbers taxpayers deserve to see. Stop managing the optics. Washington's political leaders will blame drought. They will blame heat. They'll blame the wind. They will blame lightning. They will blame careless citizens, and some of those factors absolutely contributed to this disaster. But drought does not prohibit thinning. Heat does not file environmental lawsuits. Wind doesn't write smoke regulations. Lightning does not decide that preserving every snag, shrub, and beetle is more important than protecting a community. Weather creates dangerous conditions. Government policy determines how prepared we are when those conditions arrive. We cannot control every lightning strike. We cannot eliminate the wind. We can't prevent every human-caused ignition, but we can control fuel. We can thin forest. We can remove dangerous accumulations. We can conduct prescribed burns. We can create defensible space. We can manage public land for human safety and ecological health rather than sacrificing one for a narrow ideological interpretation of the other. Protecting people does not mean abandoning conservation. Protecting homes does not mean clear-cutting every forest. Responsible management is not anti-environment. A healthy, actively managed forest is far better for wildlife, water, soil, air quality, and nearby communities than millions of acres of unmanaged fuel waiting to become the next disaster. The people of Washington should not have to lose their homes because politicians are more frightened of temporary smoke, activist lawsuits, and environmental criticism than they are of catastrophic fire. We do not need another strategic plan telling us what everyone already knows. We need saws running. We need crews clearing. We need prescribed fire on the ground. We need fuel breaks protecting communities, and we need political leaders willing to put the lives and homes of Washington residents ahead of ideology. Because forests do not care about press releases. Fire doesn't stop at jurisdictional boundaries. And when government refuses to manage the land, eventually the fire will manage it for us. The only difference is that fire does not ask what it destroys. It is time for Washington Democrats to start punishing criminals and to prioritize people over bugs, animals, and fish. That is the question Washington leaders must answer. How many more homes must burn before active forest management becomes more important than environmental policies? because these disasters are no longer isolated warnings. They are the predictable results of decisions made over decades. The spark may be accidental. The weather may be extreme. But allowing the fuel to accumulate year after year is a choice, and Washington families are now paying the price for it. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person we built this channel for. Left Coast News exists to cut through the noise and bring you straightforward analysis of the stories shaping Washington, the Pacific Northwest, and beyond. If you found this video valuable, please subscribe and follow us wherever you get your content, including YouTube, Rumble, Brighteon, BitChute, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you'd like to help support independent journalism, you can also join us on Patreon. Patreon is free for now. You'll find the link in the description below. And if you think this story matters, share it with your friends and family. That's one of the biggest ways you can help this channel grow. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Do you agree with this analysis, or do you see it differently? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching Left Coast News.